While the rich were enjoying a night of music and drama at luxuriously decorated West End theatres, the working classes took their pleasure in bawdy East End venues, where adults and children alike could enjoy, for a penny, debaucherous songs, dancing and comic acts, where lewd behaviour and filthy language wasn't only expected, but demanded by the audience. To call them stage plays would be a stretch of the imagination, for the shows were pantomime of the foulest kind, designed to appeal to frequently illiterate labourers, costermongers, street sellers of fruit and vegetables, and their children. Age was no barrier to admission. It was not uncommon to find boys and girls, not yet 10 years of age, making up audiences and watching acts that would make a sailor blush. The only bar on entrance to these vulgar venues of entertainment, that respectable Victorians considered dangerous dens, for they were the haunt of ruffians and thieves, was the lack of a penny. These common theatres were known as a penny gaff, and were, in reality, no more a theatre than Buckingham Palace was a tenement house in the wretched slum of St. Giles. Opened to turn a quick profit from cheap seats, they could often be found in the back room of public houses, or hastily converted old shops, and the rudimentary coverings and ornamentation were often as loud and outrageous as the entertainment. Today, you will discover, in a genuine account from the 1840s recorded by Henry Mayhew, a Victorian journalist, how these indecent and disgusting spectacles were often applauded and loudly encouraged by rough and loud-mouthed audiences, to whom all hope of innocence had long been lost to these savage shows and the company of low character, in a visit to an East End penny gaff. Before we move on, if you're interested in history like this, and you want to find out more about what life was really like for people in the past, please consider subscribing for more content. If you'd like to support what we make for you, check out the description for links to ways you can help us to continue bringing the past alive. In many of the thoroughfares of London, there are shops which have been turned into a kind of temporary theatre, admission 1 penny, where dancing and singing take place every night. Rude pictures of the performers are arranged outside to give the front a gaudy and attractive look, and at night-time coloured lamps and transparencies are displayed to draw an audience. These places are called by the costers penny gaffs, and on a Monday night as many as 6 performances will take place, each one having its 200 visitors. It's impossible to contemplate the ignorance and immorality of so numerous a class as that of the costermongers without wishing to discover the cause of their degradation. Let anyone curious on this point visit one of these penny shows, and he will wonder that any trace of virtue and honesty should remain among the people. Here, the stage, instead of being the means of illustrating a moral precept, is turned into a platform to teach the cruelest debauchery. The audience is usually composed of children so young that these dens become the schoolrooms where the guiding morals of a life are picked up, and so precocious are the little things that the girl of 9 will, from constant attendance at such places, have learnt to understand the filthiest sayings, and laugh at them as loudly as the grown-up lads around her. What notions can the young female form of marriage and chastity, when the penny theatre rings with applause at the performance of a scene whose sole point turns upon the pantomimic imitation of the unrestrained indulgence of the most corrupt appetites of our nature? How can the lad learn to check his hot passions, and think honesty and virtue admirable, when the shouts around him impart a glory to a descriptive song so painfully corrupt that it can only have been made tolerable by the most habitual excess? The men who preside over these infamous places know too well the failings of their audiences. They know that these poor children require no nicely turned joke to make the evening pass merrily, and that the filth they utter needs no double meaning to veil its obscenity. The show that will provide the most unrestrained debauchery will have the most crowded benches, and to gain this point, things are acted and spoken that it is criminal even to allude to. Not wishing to believe in the description which some of the more intelligent of the costermongers had given of these places, it was thought better to visit one of them, so that all exaggeration might be avoided. One of the least offensive of the exhibitions was fixed upon. The Penny Gaff chosen was situated in a broad street near Smithfield, and for a great distance off the jingling sound of music was heard, and the gaslight streamed out into the thick night air as from a dark lantern, glittering on the windows of the houses opposite, and lighting up the faces of the mob in the road, as on an illumination night. The front of a large shop had been entirely removed, and the entrance was decorated with paintings of the comic singers, in their most humorous attitudes. On a table against the wall was perched the band, playing what the costers call dancing tunes, with great effect, for the hole at the money-taker's box was blocked up with hands tendering the penny. The crowd without was so numerous that a policeman was in attendance to preserve order and push the boys off the pavement, the music having the effect of drawing them insensibly towards the festooned green baize curtain. The shop itself had been turned into a waiting room, and was crowded even to the top of the stairs leading to the gallery on the first floor. The ceiling of this lobby was painted blue, and spotted with whitewash clouds, to represent the heavens. The boards of the trapdoor and the larts that showed through the holes in the plaster being all the same colour. A notice was here posted over the canvas door leading into the theatre to the effect that ladies and gentlemen to the front places must pay twopence. The visitors, with a few exceptions, were all boys and girls whose ages seemed to vary from 8 to 20 years. Some of the girls, though their figures showed them to be mere children, were dressed in showy cotton velvet polkas, and wore dowdy feathers in their crushed bonnets. They stood laughing and joking with the lads in an unconcerned, impudent manner that was almost appalling. Some of them, when tired of waiting, chose their partners and commenced dancing grotesquely, to the admiration of the lookers-on, who expressed their approbation in obscene terms, that, far from disgusting the poor little women, were received as compliments, and acknowledged with smiles and coarse repartees. The boys clustered together, smoking their pipes and laughing at each other's anecdotes, or else jingling halfpence in time with the tune, while they whistled an accompaniment to it. Presently one of the performers, with a gilt crown on his well-greased locks, descended from the staircase, his fleshings covered by a dingy dressing-gown, and mixed with the mob, shaking hands with old acquaintances. The comic singer, too, made his appearance among the throng, the huge bow to his cravat, which nearly covered his waistcoat, and the red end to his nose, exciting neither merriment nor surprise. To discover the kind of entertainment, a lad near me and my companion was asked if there was any flash dancing, showing the body. With a knowing wink the boy answered, "Lots show their legs and all prime," and immediately the boy followed up his information by a request for a yinnip, to get a tib of occabot, costermonger slang for a penny to get a bit of tobacco. After waiting in the lobby some considerable time, the performance inside was concluded, and the audience came pouring out through the canvas door. As they had to pass singly, I noticed them particularly. Above 3/4 of them were women and girls, the rest consisting chiefly of mere boys, for out of about 200 persons I counted only 18 men. Forward they came, bringing an overpowering stench with them, laughing and yelling as they pushed their way through the waiting-room. One woman, carrying a sickly child with a bulging forehead, was reeling drunk, the saliva running down her mouth as she stared about her with a heavy fixed eye. 2 boys were pushing her from side to side, while the poor infant slept, breathing heavily, as if stupefied, through the din. Lads jumping on girls' shoulders, and girls laughing hysterically from being tickled by the youths behind them. Everyone shouting and jumping presented a mad scene of frightful enjoyment. When these had left, a rush for places by those in waiting began. that set at defiance the blows and strugglings of a lady in spangles who endeavoured to preserve order and take the checks. As time was a great object with the proprietor, the entertainment within began directly the first seat was taken, so that the lads without, rendered furious by the rattling of the piano within, made the canvas partition bulge in and out with the strugglings of those seeking admission, like a sail in a flagging wind. To form the theatre, the first floor had been removed. The whitewashed beams, however, still stretched from wall to wall. The lower room had evidently been the warehouse, while the upper apartment had been the sitting-room, for the paper was still on the walls. A gallery, with a canvas front, had been hurriedly built up, and it was so fragile that the boards bent under the weight of those above. The bricks in the warehouse were smeared over with red paint, and had a few black curtains daubed upon them. The coster youths require no great scenic embellishment, and indeed the stage, which was about 8 feet square, could admit of none. 2 jets of gas, like those outside a butcher's shop, were placed on each side of the proscenium, part of the stage in front of the curtain, and proved very handy for the gentlemen whose pipes required lighting. The band inside the theatre could not compare with the band without. An old grand piano, whose canvas-covered top extended the entire length of the stage, sent forth its wiry notes under the beringed fingers of a Professor Wilkinense, while another professional, with his head resting on his violin, played vigorously, as he stared unconcernedly at the noisy audience. Singing and dancing formed the whole of the hour's performance, and of the two, the singing was preferred. A young girl, of about 14 years of age, danced with more energy than grace, and seemed to be well known to the spectators, who cheered her on by her Christian name. When the dance was concluded, the proprietor of the establishment threw down a penny from the gallery, in the hopes that others might be moved to similar acts of generosity. But no one followed up the offering, so the young lady hunted after the money and departed. The comic singer, in a battered hat and huge bow to his cravat, was received with deafening shouts. Several songs were named by the costers, but the funny gentleman merely requested them to hold their jaws, and putting on a knowing look, sang a song, the whole point of which consisted in the mere utterance of some filthy word at the end of each stanza. Nothing, however, could have been more successful. The lads stamped their feet with delight. The girls screamed with enjoyment. Once or twice a young shrill laugh would anticipate the fun, as if the words were well known, or the boys would forestall the point by shouting it out before the proper time. When the song was ended, the house was in a delirium of applause. The canvas front to the gallery was beaten with sticks, drum-like, and sent down showers of white powder on the heads in the pit. Another song followed, and the actor, knowing on what his success depended, lost no opportunity of increasing his laurels. The most obscene thoughts, the most disgusting scenes, were coolly described, making a poor child near me wipe away the tears that rolled down her eyes with the enjoyment of the poison. There were 3 or 4 of these songs sung in the course of the evening, each one being encored, and then changed. One, written about Pineapple Rock, was the grand treat of the night, and offered greater scope to the rhyming powers of the author than any of the others. In this, not a single chance had been missed. Ingenuity had been exerted to its utmost, lest an obscene thought should be passed by, and it was absolutely awful to behold the relish with which the young ones jumped to the hideous meaning of the verses. There was one scene yet to come that was perfect in its wickedness. A ballet began between a man dressed up as a woman and a country clown. The most disgusting attitudes were struck, the most immoral acts represented, without one dissenting voice. If there had been any feat of agility, any grimacing, or in fact anything with which the laughter of the uneducated classes is usually associated, the applause might have been accounted for. But here were two ruffians degrading themselves each time they stirred a limb, and forcing into the brains of the childish audience before them thoughts that must embitter a lifetime, and descend from father to child like some bodily infirmity. When I had left, I spoke to a better-class costermonger on this saddening subject. "Well, sir, it is frightful," he said, "but the boys will always have their amusements. If their amusements is bad, they don't care. They only wants to laugh, and this here kind of work does it. Give 'em better singing and better dancing, and they'd go, if the price was as cheap as this is. I've seen, when a decent concert was given at a penny, as many as 4,000 costers present, behaving themselves as quietly and decently as possible. Their wives and children was with them, and no audience was better conducted. It's old stuff, talking about them preferring this sort of thing. Give 'em good things at the same price, and I know they will take the good better than the bad." My own experience with this neglected class goes to prove that if we would really lift them out of the moral mire in which they are wallowing, the first step must be to provide them with wholesome amusements. It is idle and unfeeling to believe that the great majority of a people whose days are passed in excessive toil, and whose homes are mostly of an uninviting character, will forego all amusements, and consent to pass their evenings by their no-firesides, reading tracts or singing hymns. It is folly to fancy that the mind, spent with the irksomeness of compelled labour, and depressed, perhaps, with the struggle to live by that labour, after all, will not, when the work is over, seek out some place where at least it can forget its troubles or fatigues, in the temporary pleasure begotten by some mental or physical stimulant. It is because we exact too much of the poor, because we, as it were, strive to make true knowledge and true beauty as forbidding as possible to the uneducated and unrefined, that they fly to their penny gaffs, their twopenny hops, their beer shops, and their gambling grounds for pleasures which we deny them, and which we, in our arrogance, believe it is possible for them to do without.